Imagine it's July 1946. You're a school teacher in Budapest. You've taught mathematics for 23 years. You understand numbers better than most people in the country. You've saved diligently, converting every surplus foreign into government bonds because that's what responsible citizens do. The state told you these were safe. Your union told you these were safe. Your bank told you these were safe. This morning you went to buy flour. Yesterday, a kilogram cost 460 quadrillion pengo. Today, the shopkeeper won't quote you a price. He says the number changes before he can finish writing it on the chalkboard. He says come back tomorrow and bring something other than currency. You're a mathematics teacher. You understand exponents. You understand doubling. Yet nothing in your training prepared you for prices doubling every 15 hours. That's not an estimate. That's the calculated rate, documented by Hungary's central bank during the worst hyperinflation in recorded human history. 15 hours. A cup of coffee you could afford at breakfast was beyond your means by midnight. 3 streets away, a widow lives above a butcher shop. She never went to university. She can't define inflation. She doesn't know what a government bond is. But when her husband died in 1943, he left her 2 things. The apartment she owns outright and a small leather pouch containing 11 gold coins that had been in his family since the Habsburg era. She didn't choose these assets strategically. She inherited them by accident. By August 1946, when Hungary's currency was replaced with a new forint backed by limited reserves, that widow could purchase the schoolteacher's entire apartment building, his entire building, with a fraction of her gold. Her real estate had not only maintained its value through the collapse, but had appreciated in terms of any stable measure because so many other forms of wealth had been annihilated around it. Her gold had done something even more dramatic. It had become one of the only functioning media of exchange in a country where the official currency had ceased to mean anything at all. The teacher lost everything. The widow multiplied her position several times over. They breathed the same air, walked the same streets, and lived under the same government. The difference was not intelligence, not foresight, not political connection. The difference was the form in which their wealth was held, on the day the system fractured. This is not a story about luck. This is a documented mechanical process that operates with the regularity of gravity. When a currency system breaks, wealth does not evaporate. It migrates. It moves from one category of holding to another with such consistency that you can map the destination before the journey begins by simply studying every previous instance in which it occurred. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. There is a widespread misunderstanding about what happens during an economic collapse. People believe that collapse destroys wealth, that it's a fire burning everything, leaving everyone equally impoverished in shared suffering. This is false. A collapse is not a fire. A collapse is a river changing course. The water doesn't disappear. It flows through different channels, irrigating different fields and drowning what was previously dry ground. A currency is not wealth. A currency is a unit of measurement applied to wealth. When a government expands the quantity of currency beyond what the productive capacity of the economy can support, the measurement unit shrinks. Prices adjust upward, but they do not adjust evenly. Some goods reprice within hours, others take weeks. Contracts, pension obligations, bond coupons, and salary agreements remain locked at their old nominal values for extended periods. During this adjustment lag, a transfer takes place. Wealth flows from those receiving payments fixed in the depreciating unit to those controlling assets whose values adjust upward with or ahead of the depreciation. The transfer is not announced. No official declares it. No legislation authorizes it. It simply happens, automatically, as an arithmetic consequence of the measurement unit's failure. And the assets that receive this transferred wealth are not random. They are the same ones every time, across every documented instance in the modern monetary era. 5 categories. 5 reservoirs into which the river always flows when the old channel breaks. Understanding the structure is the difference between standing on the bank, watching the water, and being carried away by it. The first reservoir is productive land, not speculative acreage purchased for future development, not vacant lots waiting for zoning approval. Productive land, soil that grows crops, pasture that feeds animals, forest that yields timber, land that produces something tangible, something caloric, something that a human body requires regardless of what any government is doing with its balance sheet. The reason productive land absorbs wealth during monetary breakdown is rooted in something older than finance. Biology. People eat every day. They eat when the economy is booming. They eat when the economy is collapsing. They eat when the currency is stable, and they eat when the currency is worthless. The demand for food output is essentially non-negotiable. This gives productive land a property that no financial instrument possesses. Its output has a floor value determined by human physiology rather than by monetary policy. During the Weimar Republic's disintegration between 1921 and 1923, rural Germany experienced something that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Farmers became the most powerful economic actors in the country. Not industrialists, not bankers, farmers. because they controlled the one output that every other person in the economy needed and could not substitute. Urban factory workers, who had been significantly wealthier than rural farmers before the inflation, found themselves traveling to the countryside, offering family heirlooms, jewelry, pianos, and furniture in exchange for potatoes, butter, and eggs. The nominal price of farmland in marks became an absurdity, rising into incomprehensible numbers. But the real value, measured in what the land could produce and what that production could command, didn't just hold. It expanded. Farmers who entered the crisis-owning land and livestock emerged from it holding not only their original assets, but also the accumulated possessions of an urban middle class that had been stripped clean by currency destruction. This is not a German anomaly. In Zimbabwe, between 2006 and 2009, functional farmland became the scarcest and most sought-after asset in the economy. Those who controlled it could dictate terms. Those who didn't were dependent on a supply chain collapsing alongside the Zimbabwean dollar. In Argentina, the great estancias of the Pampas have served this function across a century of repeated monetary crises. The peso has been redenominated, replaced, devalued, and destroyed multiple times. Through every cycle, the ranches producing beef and grain maintain their real value because global demand for Argentine agricultural output exists independently of whatever the Argentine government does with its currency. The grass grows, the cattle eat, the grain is harvested, the world buys it in dollars. The peso's collapse is, from the perspective of productive land, almost irrelevant. The mechanism is always identical. Productive land generates output that must be consumed. That output reprices instantly in the new monetary reality. The land itself cannot be printed, debased, or legislated out of existence. When every financial claim in the system is being devalued simultaneously, land that feeds people becomes the fixed point around which everything else recalibrates. The second reservoir is monetary metals, gold and silver, not as decorations, not as jewelry, as the default alternative currency that every civilization in recorded history has reverted to when its official money failed. This is not ideology. This is network effect. The same network effect that makes a telephone system valuable because everyone else has a telephone. Gold functions as money during crises because it has functioned as money during every previous crisis, and that history creates a self-reinforcing cycle of acceptance. When you offer gold to a merchant whose currency has just died, you don't need to explain what gold is. You don't need to argue for its value. 3,000 years of monetary history have already made the argument for you. The French Revolution provides one of the cleanest demonstrations. In 1789, the revolutionary government introduced the assignat, a paper currency initially backed by confiscated church lands. The backing gave it credibility, but as expenses grew, more assignats were printed. Then more, then vastly more. By 1795, the assignat had lost over 99% of its original value. A currency once backed by something real became backed by nothing but the government's desperate need to keep printing. Those who converted assignats into gold early preserved their wealth across a 6-year period that destroyed the savings of virtually every citizen who trusted the paper. The gold didn't generate yield. It didn't pay interest. It simply sat there, maintaining purchasing power while everything measured in assignats lost theirs. By the time the assignat was abandoned in 1796, gold holders could purchase assets at fractions of their pre-revolutionary values, land, businesses, buildings, from desperate sellers whose wealth had been denominated in the wrong form. During the stagflationary crisis of the 1970s in the United States, gold moved from $35 per ounce to $850, a 24-fold increase in a decade. Not because gold became more useful industrially, but because the dollar was being systematically debased through deficit spending, money creation, and negative real interest rates. Gold measured the debasement the way a thermometer measures fever. It didn't cause the fever, it reported it. In post-Soviet Russia, gold and dollar holdings became the dividing line between survival and destitution. The ruble's collapse in the early 1990s wiped out the savings of an entire generation of Soviet-era workers. Those who had acquired gold, often through informal channels because private ownership had been restricted under Soviet law, found themselves holding one of the only forms of wealth that translated into the new economic reality. The mechanism operates on a simple principle. Gold's supply cannot be expanded by political decision. It grows at roughly 1.5% per year, constrained by the physics of extraction. When a currency's supply is growing at 20, 50, or 100% per year, the ratio shifts violently in gold's favor. More currency units, chasing the same quantity of metal, produces a higher price per unit of metal. The math doesn't require trust. It requires only arithmetic. The third reservoir is operating businesses that possess pricing power. This distinction is essential, and most analyses miss it entirely. Not all businesses survive monetary collapse. Many are destroyed. Businesses with thin margins, heavy debt denominated in foreign currency, dependence on imported inputs or products, consumers can defer purchasing. These collapse alongside the currency. They are victims of the transfer, not beneficiaries. But a specific category does something different. Businesses producing goods or services that people cannot stop purchasing, facing limited competition, can raise prices continuously to match or exceed the rate of currency depreciation. When they do this, they maintain real profit margins. Their revenue and purchasing power terms hold steady or even grows, while the wages of their workers, renegotiated less frequently, lag behind. The business captures the spread between instantly adjusting output prices and slowly adjusting input costs. In Argentina, during the chronic inflation of the 1980s, companies controlling food distribution, energy production, and essential consumer goods became dominant survivors. They raised prices daily, sometimes hourly. The mechanism was brutal in its simplicity. If you produce something people must buy today, you can name tomorrow's price. If you work for a salary that adjusts quarterly, you absorb the difference. The business owner's purchasing power remains intact. The employee's collapses. In Turkey, during the high inflation period of the 1990s and early 2000s, conglomerates with diversified operations across essential sectors consolidated their positions. Smaller competitors failed. Businesses that couldn't adjust prices fast enough went bankrupt. The survivors expanded, acquiring failed competitors' assets, market share, and customer bases at distressed prices. The inflation didn't just preserve these companies. It made them larger, more dominant, and more profitable in real terms than they had been before the crisis. In Weimar Germany, Hugo Stinnes became the most prominent example. Stinnes owned industrial enterprises, mines, shipping companies, and newspapers. His businesses produced essential outputs. He borrowed heavily in marks, used borrowed money to acquire real assets, then repaid loans in depreciated currency. The inflation didn't damage him. It was his accelerant. By the peak of the crisis, Stinnes controlled an industrial empire impossible to assemble under stable monetary conditions. He wasn't a genius. He was a businessman with pricing power, operating in an environment where pricing power was the only thing that mattered. The mechanism is structural. Businesses with inelastic demand can pass currency depreciation through to customers. Those without that ability cannot. The former survive. The latter are absorbed. After every inflationary episode, market concentration increases because survivors have eaten the casualties. This is observable, measurable, and consistent across every documented case. The fourth reservoir is claims denominated in foreign currency, specifically the dominant global reserve currency. The logic is simple, but its consequences are severe. When a country's currency is collapsing, assets denominated in a stronger foreign currency appreciate in local terms by exactly the rate at which the local currency falls. If local currency loses half its value, dollar-denominated claims double in local purchasing power. If it loses 90%, those claims multiply tenfold. During the Asian financial crisis of 1997, this mechanism operated across an entire region simultaneously. The Thai baht, Indonesian rupiah, Korean won, and Malaysian ringgit all collapsed. In every case, those holding dollar-denominated assets saw their local purchasing power multiply dramatically. An Indonesian businessman who had moved savings into dollar accounts before the crisis could, by early 1998, purchase Jakarta real estate at 80% discounts to its previous dollar value. Not because the buildings were worth less, but because the currency in which local prices were quoted had disintegrated. The Latin American debt crisis of the 1980s provided an even more dramatic illustration. Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and several other nations had borrowed heavily in dollars during the 1970s. When the Federal Reserve raised rates sharply under Volcker, the cost of servicing those dollar debts increased, just as local currencies were collapsing. Foreign creditors holding dollar claims found themselves in extraordinary leverage positions. They could demand structural reforms, privatization of state assets, and favorable investment terms as conditions for debt restructuring. The wealth transfer wasn't just financial, it was institutional, reshaping the economic architecture of entire nations. In Venezuela, from 2014 onward, anyone holding dollars experienced purchasing power growth that defies description. The bolivar went from roughly 6 per dollar in 2013 to millions per dollar by 2018. A Venezuelan family that had converted even modest savings into dollars could sustain itself for years on money that, in bolivar terms, represented a fortune. Those without dollars were forced into barter, trading household goods and labor for necessities. The constraint this reveals is uncomfortable. For citizens of vulnerable countries, the most effective short-term preservation strategy is holding another nation's currency. Their safety is denominated in someone else's sovereignty. That is not independence. That is the financial equivalent of living in someone else's house. You are safe only as long as the landlord is stable. The fifth reservoir is real property in locations where demand is structurally sustained. This is distinct from productive agricultural land. Urban real estate doesn't produce food. Its value derives from location scarcity, the inability to create more of a specific place, a specific intersection, a specific waterfront, a specific commercial district. Physics constrains the supply of locations in the way that printing presses constrain nothing about paper currency. In Weimar Germany, Berlin apartment owners experienced a trajectory illustrating the full mechanism. During hyperinflation, rents paid in marks became worthless almost immediately. Rent controls, imposed by a government terrified of social unrest, prevented landlords from adjusting. In the short term, property owners appeared to be losing, buildings generating no real income. But here is where the mechanism completes itself. When currency was stabilized in late 1923 and the Rentenmark was introduced, those buildings still existed. They hadn't been printed. They hadn't been inflated away. They stood on their foundations, in their locations, revalued in the new currency at levels reflecting replacement cost and locational scarcity. The tenant's back rent was lost. The speculators' paper profits were erased. But the physical buildings, owned by those with clear title, re-emerged as some of the most valuable assets in the new monetary regime. Property owners who held their nerve emerged with assets not only intact, but relatively more valuable, because the crisis had destroyed so many other forms of wealth that real estate's share of total surviving wealth had increased. In Moscow, after the Soviet collapse, apartment ownership created instant stratification. Those in centrally located apartments privatized under Yeltsin's reforms acquired assets worth hundreds of thousands of dollars within a decade. Those in peripheral areas, or those who sold privatization vouchers for immediate cash, received a fraction of the long-term value. Same city, same reform. Vastly different outcomes based entirely on location. In every documented hyperinflation, urban real estate in functional cities follows the same trajectory. Short-term nominal distortion, medium-term real decline as economic activity contracts, long-term real recovery, and often appreciation as fundamental scarcity reasserts itself against destroyed financial alternatives. The key constraint is debt. Property owners with clear title survived. Those leveraged with foreign currency mortgages were often destroyed, because the mechanism making foreign currency claims powerful for holders makes them lethal for debtors. The mortgage doubles in local terms while property income collapses. The distinction between unencumbered and leveraged real estate is the difference between catching wealth and drowning in it. There's also a sixth category worth noting, though it is harder to quantify: specialized human capital. Skills and expertise commanding compensation in real terms because the services cannot be deferred or substituted. In Hungary during 1946, government employees on fixed salaries experienced complete financial annihilation. A civil servant's pengo salary became meaningless, but a surgeon in the same city could demand payment in food, goods, gold, or foreign currency because a patient with appendicitis cannot defer surgery until the currency stabilizes. The surgeon's skill was the asset. It repriced instantly. The civil servant's salary was the casualty. In Venezuela's collapse, mechanics who could repair the aging vehicle fleet commanded payment in dollars or goods. Electricians, plumbers, anyone whose skills addressed immediate physical needs operated in a parallel economy where compensation tracked real value. University professors and government administrators whose roles existed within the formal currency-denominated economy saw their living standards collapse. The implication extends beyond crisis periods. The type of skill matters less than the repricing flexibility it carries. A highly educated professional earning a government salary in a fragile currency is more vulnerable than a tradesperson who can charge per job in whatever medium of exchange is functional. The hierarchy of formal credentialing inverts. What matters is not the title, but the pricing power. Now step back and look at the complete picture. 5 reservoirs, with a 6th built on human capital rather than held assets. Productive land, monetary metals, essential businesses with pricing power, foreign currency claims, strategic real estate held without debt, and specialized skills with inelastic demand. Every one of these categories shares a single structural feature. They exist outside the unit of measurement that is failing. They don't depend on the currency maintaining its value. They don't depend on the government honoring its commitments. They don't depend on the banking system functioning. They simply are what they are, producing what they produce, occupying the space they occupy, regardless of what number is printed on the pieces of paper circulating through the economy. On the opposite side, the assets destroyed share their own common feature. They are promises. A bank deposit is a promise by the bank to return your purchasing power. A pension is a promise to pay specified real income in the future. A bond is a promise to return principal with interest. A salary is a promise to compensate you at a rate reflecting current costs. Every one of these promises is denominated in the currency. Everyone is only as reliable as the currency is stable. When the currency fails, the promises don't technically break. They are honored in nominal terms. Your pension check arrives. Your bank balance is intact. Your bond pays its coupon. But the purchasing power inside those nominal figures has been drained out quietly through a mechanism requiring no announcement, no default, no bankruptcy filing, and no act of overt theft. This is the cruelest aspect of the transfer. It masquerades as normality. The institutions continue operating. The paperwork is in order, the pension fund sends its monthly statement, everything appears to be functioning, and yet the retiree discovers that the number, which looks correct on paper, now buys a fraction of what it purchased a year ago, 6 months ago, last month. The postal worker in Weimar Germany received every pfennig owed to him, every payment made on time, in full. He was paid precisely what he was promised, and he was destroyed by it, because the promise was denominated in a unit that no longer meant anything. Who pays the cost of this transfer? The historical record is unambiguous. The middle class pays. Every single time. The wealthy hold diversified assets by nature, land, metals, businesses, foreign currency, real estate across jurisdictions. Diversification is a natural consequence of having enough wealth to spread. The poor are paradoxically less damaged in relative terms. They didn't have savings to lose. They didn't hold bonds going to zero. Their condition was already precarious, and while it worsens, the relative decline is smaller because they had less to lose. The middle class occupies maximum vulnerability. They saved, they followed the rules, they trusted institutions, deposited money in banks, bought government bonds, paid into pension systems, and built financial security on instruments denominated entirely in the currency. They stand in the largest numbers, with the greatest concentration of exposure, directly in the path of the transfer. The data confirms this across every episode. After Weimar, the German middle class was devastated. After the Latin American crises of the 1980s, middle-class savings were annihilated across multiple countries. After the Asian crisis, local currency household savings were destroyed, while foreign capital returned to purchase assets at discounts. The pattern produces a specific statistical signature. Median wealth falls. Mean wealth is less affected or recovers faster. The gap widens. This signature appears following every major monetary disruption in the last century. It is the statistical fingerprint of the transfer in action. The global financial system currently carries a volume of promises, denominated in currencies, that exceeds the productive capacity of the global economy to honor in real terms. Global government debt exceeds $100 trillion. Unfunded entitlement obligations in the United States alone, including Social Security and Medicare, are estimated at over $170 trillion in present value terms. Corporate debt, household debt, and financial sector obligations add further layers. These promises can be honored in one of three ways. The first is real economic growth sufficient to generate the revenue needed to service all obligations at current real value. This would require sustained growth rates well above historical norms for developed economies. The arithmetic does not support this option. The second is explicit default. Governments announce they cannot pay. Bonds take losses. Pensions are cut. This is honest, transparent, and politically impossible. No democratic government has voluntarily imposed losses of this magnitude on voters. The third is implicit default through currency debasement. Print more money. Honor every promise, nominally, while allowing real value to erode through inflation. The pension is paid. The bond matures. But purchasing power inside each payment has been quietly reduced. This third option has been chosen implicitly or explicitly in every historical case where the first two proved insufficient. It is chosen because it is the only option allowing governments to claim obligations were honored while actually reducing them. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial or investment advice. History does not move on a schedule. A system can persist in unsustainable imbalance far longer than logic suggests, sustained by confidence. Inertia in the absence of a triggering event. But consider what the pattern tells us about the nature of wealth itself. The things that survive are not clever, they are not sophisticated, they are not products of financial engineering or quantitative modeling. They are ancient, soil, metal, essential production, location, useful skill, the capacity to generate something a human body needs regardless of what any institution is doing. The things destroyed are equally consistent. They are promises, future claims, paper denominated in a unit controlled by an institution with an incentive to debase it. They are sophisticated, modern, and precisely documented. And they fail every time when the unit they are denominated in fails. The school teacher in Budapest understood mathematics. He understood numbers, equations, and proofs. But the numbers on his bond certificates meant nothing when the unit behind those numbers dissolved. The widow 3 streets away understood none of it. She simply held things that didn't require a functioning currency to have value. Same city, same collapse, same transfer. Two different outcomes separated entirely by the form of holding. The question is not whether this mechanism will activate again. The conditions that activate it are present in more countries, at greater scale, and with deeper structural entrenchment than at any previous point in documented history. The question is whether the people who will be affected understand, before it activates, which side of the transfer they are standing on. Because by the time the transfer is visible, it is already too late to change positions. The river has already changed course. The old channel is dry. and the new channel is flowing through ground that was chosen not by anyone's decision, but by the unchangeable physics of what holds value and what doesn't when the measuring stick breaks. The pattern is already in motion. It has always been in motion. The machinery underneath does not require permission to operate.